Welcome in, everybody, to the Flagship Podcast. Eric Henry of Horns247 and myself, Chip Brown of Horns247. We're back in Austin. Last time you saw us, we were wishing you Happy New Year from the Sugar Bowl. Tough night, obviously, with Washington prevailing 37-31. Now, full disclosure, we're recording on Wednesday after the national championship game, Michigan taking down Washington 34-13. Wow. With Michigan running for 303 yards. And I won't belabor the point, but would have been nice to see Texas run the ball a little bit more against Washington, especially early in the game. Don't come at me with the fumbles. I'm talking about like what Michigan did, running for 19 yards a carry in the first quarter, two touchdown runs of 46 and 41 yards. But we have much to get to, Eric. We're not going to belabor what have, could have, should have's, what ifs. We got real stuff to deal with here. We got Texas Longhorns declaring for the NFL draft. We've got Texas Longhorns saying they're coming back. Let's start there before we get to Johnny Nansen as the new co-defensive coordinator and linebackers coach for the Longhorns. Obviously, if you follow along at horns247.com, we've kept you up to date. Sometimes we've kept you up before it happens with regard to who's leaving. And that list is painful, but understandable. Jonathan Brooks is leaving. Tight end Jatavian Sanders is leaving. Jaron Thompson and Keaton Crawford are in the portal. Byron Murphy's going to the NFL draft. Isaiah Nayer's now at Nebraska. Jalen Catalon's now at UNLV. A.D. Mitchell has announced he is entering the NFL draft. Ryan Watts is also entering the NFL draft. Jalen Ford is entering the NFL draft. But good news, Jake Majors says he's coming back for another year. So is Alfred Collins, the big defensive tackle, will come back for a fifth year. And David Benda, who announced yesterday that he plans to come back to Texas and be a part of that linebacker core along with Anthony Hill, Leon Lafau, Mo Blackwell. Eric, your thoughts?
Yeah, it has been an eventful, 8 days since the Sugar Bowl ended. There were a lot of questions as to who would be back, who wouldn't be back. Still obviously have two names, most notably being Quinn Ewers and Jaden Barron, who have not announced. Chip, you were out in front of things a few months ago, or not a few months ago, I should say. It feels like a few months ago, but it actually was right around the time of the Big 12 title game, which feels like an eternity ago. The sentiment, the feeling is that Quinn Ewers will be back, but again, do not have an official announcement yet. Jaden Barron, of course, has the COVID year, and that is another big one as well. I think I'm just going to start with the guys who are gone. In my mind, no real surprises. I think the biggest surprise, if you wanted to do the air quote surprise, would probably be Ryan Watts. That's someone that you think probably could have went 50-50. I think in the transfer portal, take a look at Jaron Thompson leaving, and that may have been one that raised some eyebrows. But again, you got to kind of take a look at, the way this year's roster shook out with Jaron. And I wrote about this, while he still played over 530 snaps, his snap count was down almost 250 snaps from a season prior. And of course, you get Andrew Makuba coming in, coming back home, coming from Clemson. Xavier Filasami coming in, and you got to assume that it's going to be another safety rotation. Even with Michael Taft, he's not going anywhere. He's, burnt orange and white through and through. Austin native, he's not going anywhere. So there's three names, which would have been in addition to Jaron, should he have decided to return. Obviously, heads out in the transfer portal. But yeah, like I mentioned, Chip, in my mind, no real surprise. I mean, a guy like Byron Murphy leaving early. Guess what, guys? There's the NFL has a premium on massive defensive tackles who, are strong like oxes and can wreck shop inside, right? So no real surprise there after the year he had. Of course, Devondre Sweat out of eligibility. I'd say as far as the returners, David Benda, that one surprised me a little bit. Just the fact that, he's obviously a veteran guy, and you have to wonder what his role in the linebacker room will be. Chip, could it be similar to this year's role, right? He talked about Leonga Lafau, whether he's, we kind of looked at him as the possible heir apparent to Jalen Ford on the inside, but that could be a situation where maybe he's on the outside and maybe Anthony Hill is on the inside. But is Benda kind of that guy who's that bridge gap, right? Where he gets more playing time in the early part of the year until a guy like Lafau, which again, he may be ready coming out of camp, but maybe it's a similar situation. Who knows? But I think that's a guy like Benda. He's a smart guy. We talk to him pretty regular. He's pretty self-aware. He knows his role on this team. So in terms of returners, Chip, I think one of the biggest building blocks of guys who had a stay or go decision was Alfred Collins. And I want to give, you and Jeff credit as far as really planting the seed. So I think the return of AC, Chip, is one that, again, was left to see what happens with Quinn, and you reported that all signs point to him return to Texas. And I'd love to see what happens with Jade. But if you can at least get this final year of AC, he takes that next, still he's done an adequate job as a run stuffer and his size and athleticism, but the next step for him is from, being kind of just a rotational guy to being just a guy who just wrecks shop in the insides, his pass rush. If he can take that next step combined with a Vernon Broughton, we'll see Trill Carter enter the transfer portal. I can't remember where Trill just landed. I believe it was back in the Power 5, memory serves me correct. So he's obviously no longer with the roster, but some of the young guys you feel confident in and DeAndre Robinson, Alex January, and some other guys, that's going to be key to see where that interior of the defensive line really lies.
Yeah. I agree with you. And Trill Carter has committed to Auburn. So yeah, the Alfred Collins news is big time. As far as Quinn, I guess he's out hunting. I keep seeing pictures of him with some giant buck laying next to him.
Well, Chip, I just saw him at the Tarrant County, which I know you went to SMU, so you can speak to that better than I. Is that Fort Worth?
Fort Worth.
Yeah, he was at the Tarrant County. He was in a suit, Chip. I just feel like, we got to create a juxtaposition here. He was at Tarrant County leading the Commissioner's Court of Invocation yesterday morning in a suit. So juxtapose that compared to him being out hunting. So I just had to throw it out there really quick.
Well, I think Longhorn fans are like, yo, Quinn, while you're driving to the Tarrant County event or driving back from, hunting a buck, can you give us a little heads up on what the plans are? Because everybody's eagerly awaiting the decision. And as far as Jade Barron, we know he accepted his Senior Bowl invitation. He accepted it a while ago before the season ended. And then, Eric, he didn't have the kind of finish to the season he would have wanted. I mean, from the Pro Football Focus grade standpoint, 5 of his worst games came in the back half of the season. And I don't know what was going on, if he was putting too much pressure on himself or what, but that we saw some football from Jade Barron we're not used to seeing. And so who knows? I mean, the last time I talked to a source close to that situation, they felt like Jade was doing his homework, but that it was still probably 70-30 him leaving. But that was 4 or 5 days ago. So it is interesting that Jade, who does not have to he's got until the 15th of this month to enter. I guess he's considered an underclassman because he has the COVID year. I don't know, but I would imagine we'll get an indication soon because school resumes on January 16th, and so that would be interesting if Jade Barron decided to come back. I'm not hearing that at this point, but with each day passing by, it makes you wonder. And it is going to be interesting, Eric, because as we start to look ahead now, we got 18 early enrollees coming in here for the beginning of this spring semester. And that's incredible. It used to be like 3 or 4 guys. Now we're talking about 18, and they're high impact guys like Colin Simmons and Brandon Baker, Kobe Black, Xavier Filsaime, you mentioned, Andrew Makuba, the transfer from Clemson, will be here right away. But, the secondary is fascinating because Ryan Watts is leaving. I think Malik Muhammad steps right in at boundary corner. And then you've got, Gavin Holmes is still part of the program, and Terrence Brooks, but Warren Roberson's a name that we've heard that to keep an eye on at corner. And you've also got, Jalen Gilbo and Austin Jordan, who've played some nickel, Jelani McDonald, who can play nickel or safety. I'm starting to think he will probably be at safety, but it's going to be an eventful spring for sure, because you've got a lot of big names you've got to fill and replace on the offensive side. Certainly Adonai Mitchell, as big I don't know if there was a player in the, from the transfer portal who had a bigger impact on his new team in all of college football than Adonai Mitchell, with 11 touchdown catches, including a catch in the Sugar Bowl that gave him a touchdown catch in 5 straight college football playoff games, and nearly the game winner on that final play of the Sugar Bowl. So there's a lot going on. But yeah, you mentioned the Jaron Thompson decision, and with Andrew Makuba coming in, we know Derek Williams is a guy they're very high on and a guy they're going to have in the rotation for sure. I thought that was interesting. Jaron Thompson was the best cover defensive back for Texas, according to Pro Football Focus this year, but up and down, other areas, missed tackles, that kind of thing, gave up more touchdowns than any other defensive back in for Texas as well, which is interesting. So yeah, there's a lot going on here. And you've also got ESPN coming out with their way too early rankings, and they've got Texas number 2 behind Georgia. And that felt a little high. Felt a little high to me, Eric. A little high.
Listen, I'm right there with you. And listen, I guess what really gave me pause is we don't even know, for all intents and purposes, again, we believe Quinn Ewers is coming back, but man, like, you go on number 2 and we don't even have confirmation on some of those things yet. I guess they're projecting Quinn to be back as well. But, you lose a Jonathan Brooks, and you lose T'Vondre Sweat and Byron Murphy and all the guys we rattled off to go number 2. There's a twofold way of looking at it, right? One, man, that's a little high. But the flip side is it really gives testament, Chip, to what Steve Sarkisian has built, to where this is no longer a team that you have to see everything in front of you. You can believe that the cupboard is full. The cupboard is not empty. This is going to be a reload, not a rebuild, at least per ESPN. I will say this, Chip. I'm going to touch on a couple of points. One, let's start with the run game. CJ Baxter, Jaden Blue. I think in my mind, I was really impressed with CJ's 116-yard outing, if memory serves me correct, at Iowa State. I think that showed that he's a guy you can turn around and hand the ball to 20 times. Is he still learning the position? Absolutely. Is he breaking tackles, forcing missed tackles at the rate that Jonathan Brooks was? And that crucial ability is just one that really saw this Texas offense go from kind of being stagnant in a sense those first 2 weeks. Not to say that Alabama didn't play a great game, but one that post Wyoming really kind of hit their stride, right? I think CJ is going to grow in that regard. That's one. Jaden Blue, Chip, looks to be just a home run threat potentially every time you give him the football. That 1-2 punch, I think, is going to do a phenomenal job in the run game and really, give Texas, and Tashard Choice, possibly one of the top running back rooms in the nation for the third straight year, excuse me. We'll flip to receivers really quick, right? It's a bit unproven, but I think you got high upside. You got Jonte Cook, you got Matt Golden, who was a guy who, again, was a 4-star recruit for Houston, and played really well. Of course, his freshman year was under Tank Dell, right? So, DeAndre Moore is a guy that
caught 2 touchdowns against Texas.
2 touchdowns against Texas. Certainly can play against big time competition. DeAndre Moore, Ryan Wingo, the guys coming in. High upside. Again, you have to feel confident there. We'll see what that looks like. Definitely glad that you have some of those guys coming in early, right? But you take a look at the tight end spot, JT Sanders, guy we didn't talk about too much, but he makes a decision to leave for the NFL draft. Gunnar Helm, shown that he can be adequate enough at tight end, Chip, in terms of he's not going to be the athletic specimen that JT was, but Gunnar's to quote Jeff Banks, a guy who busts his ass and went in there and, asked for a greater role and went out there and earned it, right? And that's something I think you compare. And of course, you're going to fill in behind him. So I think at least offensively, you can feel confident about some of the guys you're losing. And we've talked about the defensive guys. I talked about the interior, the defensive line. You have to fill with a Colin Simmons coming in, and you talk about the secondary. There's only room for growth there. So maybe, just maybe, Chip, ESPN, as I said, feels that this is a reload and not a rebuild.
Yeah, I think that's a huge testament to the confidence they have in Steve Sarkisian offensively, that he's going to attract players like A.D. Mitchell, who didn't even take a visit, finished his second national championship season at Georgia, wanted to be closer to his daughter, Iselin, his 2-year-old daughter, who was living with his parents in Texas. And so he picks Texas without taking a visit because he knows Steve Sarkisian's offense. He watched Alabama in 2020. He watched Xavier Worthy catch 12 touchdown passes as a freshman and knew Texas was a place. I was told by a source very close to that situation, AD wants to go somewhere where he can catch 50 balls and 10 touchdowns and go to the NFL. And he caught 55 balls and 11 touchdowns, and he's going to the NFL. So I think that pedigree shows. And obviously getting a guy like Matthew Golden in the portal, I don't think Texas is done in the portal at the receiver position. And then the way that they're recruiting at receiver, like you said, with Jonte Cook and Ryan Wingo, you've got, Freddie Dubose and Parker Livingstone, who's, 6'4" guy who can run away from people and is all dyed-in-the-wool Texas. So I just think that people look at a Steve Sarkisian team and know, oh, he's going to have a quarterback. He's going to have receivers. So we don't worry about the Texas offense. It's about the Texas defense. And on the Texas defense, I'll say, there has been, and I'm trying to see if the smoke has died down. LSU was coming hard after Bo Davis again. Brian Kelly seems like this is his annual attempt to lure Bo Davis to LSU, and Bo's still here. So at this point, I think it may have, that attempt has come and gone, but it was real. And LSU was really, putting a lot into that. So look, if Bo Davis stays, that's huge, right up there with Alfred Collins and Vernon Broughton and all those guys, because you look at their farm system with Sadir Mitchell, Jared Bledsoe, those are guys who need to really make a big move this year. And then you get the 3 newcomers with Alex January, Melvin Hills, DeAndre Robinson. Those guys need to hit the ground running, develop as quickly as possible. Look at Michigan, Eric. We're going to be writing stories about Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham. Those dudes are sophomores, and they were playing a ton at defensive tackle for Michigan and making plays. And so that's just such a tough position. We talk about it all the time. difference-making defensive tackles are the hardest players to find outside of a top-end quarterback, maybe even harder these days with all the quarterback 7-on-7 and quarterback coaches and all that. And Bo Davis, he develops those guys. So a lot has been going on in terms of the offseason. And that brings us to Johnny Nansen, the new co-defensive coordinator, linebackers coach for Texas, who was the defensive coordinator at Arizona. And Johnny Nansen is a guy who has worked with both Steve Sarkisian and Pete Kwiatkowski, dating back to their days at Washington, Steve Sarkisian's days at Washington. And then he went with Steve Sarkisian to USC. He was actually retained at USC when Steve Sarkisian was fired in 2015. And Johnny Nansen kind of kept building his resume to the point where he became the defensive coordinator at Arizona under Jed Fish and helped them to a very successful season, beat Oklahoma in the bowl game. And I know, the folks at Arizona were really disappointed when Johnny Nansen, took the Texas job. But Eric, he's also a really strong recruiter. They call him the Poly Whisperer because he's got such a strong connection to the Polynesian community and has found, I'm going to butcher the name, but Lufanga, who is one of the best DBs in the NFL right now. He's just a guy who knows what he's looking at in terms of talent evaluation, can recruit, and can develop. And there's history. So this feels like a solid hire. Jeff Choate is really a really talented coach. Felt like Texas was lucky to get him. He only came to Texas because Montana had canceled their season because of COVID. And he was like, I got to go somewhere. At that point, didn't know what the future held. So he took the job at Texas in early 2021. And he certainly helped develop that linebacker room. Jalen Ford, Anthony Hill. Now he's the head coach at Nevada. Good for him. And so, that's a big piece of the puzzle that's been added to the coaching staff.
Yeah, Chip, I'm going to work in reverse here. You talked about his talents as a recruiter. I think you did a great job spotlighting that when you broke that hire. That's what stood out to me. I think if you get someone who, listen, I think there are enough recruiters on this staff who have various areas covered, right? But to get someone who kind of, has that West Coast, Southern California landscape, and as you mentioned, the Poly Whisperer, Chip, that just feels like another coup, and you talk about Arizona not wanting him to leave and be disappointed he left. I mean, just what a major, in my mind, win for Texas to be able to get someone just even on that front alone, because he's gonna be able to bolster the roster from that front, right? And that area produces a lot of talent, especially defensively, guys who will fit that mold. Now, the other aspect of it in my mind is I think staff continuity matters, Chip. I think I've seen a lot of it in my 8 years covering college football, to where you can't just get a guy and I mean, Chip, it happens sometimes. You don't always have to have a prior relationship with an assistant. Sometimes you can be recommended by someone, or a coach swallows their pride and says, hey, this might be for the betterment of my program. But I think being able to get someone, as you talked about, having that prior relationship with both PK and Steve Sarkisian, just huge, because this entire season, as was told to us, was built on culture, right? And if you get someone like him who is going to be able to pick up that messaging that trickles down from Steve Sarkisian and company, and someone who is going to kind of coach in that mold and emulate his relationship with his players in that mold, that again is huge. So just in my mind, a win on several fronts for Texas.
Yeah. And one of the players that Johnny Nansen is credited with helping to develop there at Arizona, Jacob Manu, sophomore, all Pac-12 first team linebacker who led the Pac-12 in tackles and tackles per game, while also posting 6.5 sacks. So that sophomore. I always like to point out when the young guys are breaking through and making an impact. And so Johnny Nansen looks to be a solid addition to this coaching staff. Yeah, the just one more thought on the ESPN way too early rankings at number 2. Um, Obviously to me, we got to see that we got to see the pass catchers come in. Texas is losing its top 5 pass catchers. When you look at Xavier Worthy, A.D. Mitchell, Jordan Whittington, Jatavian Sanders, and Jonathan Brooks. So that's a lot, and we got to see how that comes together. I don't have any reason to doubt that it won't come together, especially if Quinn Ewers is indeed back at quarterback. And then, defensively, how's that communication? You want to be strong right up the spine of your defense, your 2 defensive tackles, your middle linebacker, your safeties. You got to be strong right up the spine, and that communication has to be great. Well, that's going to be all new in a lot of ways. Even if with Alfred Collins and Vernon Broughton, guys who've played, they have to get used to communicating with whoever's going to be the new middle linebacker, whether it's David Benda or Anthony Hill or Leonga Lafau. And then they have to get used to the communication with the back end of the defense. I thought there were some issues with that this year that impacted certain games, especially the games where Texas had big leads and then suddenly teams are getting hot in the passing game. But that culture also needs to be revitalized. And I think Steve Sarkisian knows it. And so, look, we're going to find out September 7th what's going on with these Texas Longhorns, because they're going to play the national champion Michigan Wolverines in the Big House, and that's going to let everybody know just exactly where Texas is. Eric, Texas basketball, we chose to record on a Wednesday so we could watch Texas play at Cincinnati last night. And I got to say, I thought there was a major breakthrough in this game. And I'm not breaking any news here. Dylan Dizu, 33 points, 6 rebounds, 2 blocks, 4 steals. He dominated that game from start to finish. And this was the Dylan Dizu we saw at the end of last year when he emerged in the Big 12 tournament and never stopped. Averaged 22 points, 10 rebounds in the NCAA tournament, was the guy who turned around the Penn State game. They were up 11. Suddenly they were down 3 with 4 minutes left, and they were in a huddle, and Rodney Terry's drawn up a play for Marcus Carr, and Marcus Carr said, no, let's draw it up for Dylan. He's hot. And Dylan Dizu, they came out of that timeout. Dylan Dizu scored 10 of the next 12 points and helped Texas extend their lead back out in that win. And then, heartbreaking, he injures his foot in practice that week. He ends up having to have off-season surgery, and we just hadn't seen him play with that kind of confidence. Hell, we hadn't even seen him start until last night, Eric. And then he starts for Caden Shedrick, who had back spasms, and Dylan Dizu was everywhere, like from the beginning. Ended up making 4 3-pointers. His defensive effort, mentioned the 4 steals, the 2 blocks. He hits the answer basket down the stretch with 43 seconds left. And then they get a last second, or, Max Asmus hits the game winner with 8 seconds left. Since he misses a pretty good look at a 3, Texas gets out of there with a win. But to me, this team's been looking for a player to lead. And Dylan Dizu is that guy, because we saw it last year, and then we saw it again last night. And now I'm fascinated to see how Rodney Terry coaches this team. And I mean, obviously Dylan Dezou's got to be in the starting lineup. Brock Cunningham can come off the bench. He's a much better energy guy off the bench than as a starter. I think that's an easy switch. And if I'm Rodney Terry, I'm telling the guards, hey, we need more post touches for Dylan Dezou or wherever he is, because he's the best three-point shooting. He's the best three-point shooter on the team right now. He's hit 10 of 19, 52%. So I thought this was a massive breakthrough last night.
Oh man, Chip, there's a lot to dive into with this Texas basketball team, and I've covered them, from the exhibition through St. Edwards all the way through last night's game. I think you did an excellent job, really kind of giving the nuts and bolts of last night's game. So I won't dive too much into that, but I will try to tackle the major issue you touched on there and kind of provide a bigger perspective. Dylan Dezou, as you talked about, Chip, it felt like even from the time this team opened the season, we weren't going to get a true read on what they were until Dezou was back and Caden Shedrick was healthy. Well, Shedrick ended up getting cleared 2 days before the season opener, and he appeared to really kind of be a nice piece. The biggest thing with Caden, Chip, is quite frankly, as a big, he can't pass himself the ball. And he's had a couple nights this year where he's only gotten 4 shots, 5 shots. That's been challenging. So now you get Dylan Dezou back. He comes back for the LSU game, and he puts up 17 in his first game back. And then it's been a bit of a work in progress. The last 4 games prior to last night's game hadn't had double digits. And as you mentioned, was coming off the bench, the starting lineup of Max Asmus, Tyrese Hunter, Dylan Mitchell, Caden Shedrick, and Brock Cunningham pretty much carried the way with a few blips here and there, which I'll come to in a second. You make the case, which seems like an easy switching Brock Cunningham out for Dylan Dezou. I do think that's something you have to entertain, right? After last night's performance, there's no way, and Dezou was on a minutes restriction, as we were told by RT and Dezou leading up to, the 2-game road swing that, was looking about 20-something minutes a night. Dezou said in the postgame that, he hadn't played more than 21, 22, played I believe it was 34 last night, if memory serves me correct, or 36 minutes. I have to go back and check the box score there. But yeah, I think now, Chip, whether it was, through accident or through circumstance, you now can see that Dezou's ready for more action. So sliding him into
34 minutes last night.
34, right? So there you go. So it looks like he's going to be ready for more action. Chip, we got to talk about this bench. Because it is, quite frankly, it's an issue. I asked RT following the 78-67 loss to Texas Tech, in which Tech had 20 bench points to Texas's 11. I asked him, I said, hey, kind of what are your feelings on the bench? And he talked about, kind of give the standard answer of, that everyone needs to do more, right? It's not just a bench thing. But you take a look at last night's game, Chip, 4 bench points from the Texas Longhorns bench compared to, I believe, 26 from Cincy. You have 4 players right now. It's really been an 8 to 9 man rotation. You have 4 players who are primarily coming off the bench. You got Zarek Onyema, who's someone, Chip, who I know you've been high on, but he's kind of been a little up and down this year. You have IT Horton. You can kind of use Brock Cunningham. He's been, primarily a starter, but he's come off the bench. And Kendall Weaver. That's it, right? Chip, if you send Brock to the bench, in my mind, if you're not getting scoring from Kendall Weaver right now, his game is effort, it's energy, it's hard-nosed, but still not a consistent shooter, which is a bit surprising considering if you take a look last year playing at the WAC, he was a 40% shooter from 3, not reaching those numbers this year. And then the biggest thing, Chip, that we got to get into is IT Horton. And this one, I've seen a fair amount of IT because he spent last year at my alma mater, UCF, and prior to that was at Pitt and at Delaware. Chip, his entire career, he's been a scorer. He's been a guy as a 3-point shooter. You know what you're getting with him. His defensive rating this year could leave a little bit to be desired, but he's been that way, Chip, his entire career. He's never been the best on-ball defender, never been the best perimeter defender, but he's been able to offset what he lacks on defense by being a guy who's going to give you at least 10-plus points a game. The most interesting quote, Chip, and I don't know if you heard it, was after, it was the UT Arlington game that Tyrese Hunter missed with the flu or was sick. It wasn't said flu, but it was sick. IT slid into the starting lineup. gave you 10 points and 10 rebounds. Post game, he was asked, I believe Mark Rosner of the Associated Press asked him the question in terms of, what's it been like adjusting to being off the bench versus the starter? And he said, and this isn't the direct quote, I'm kind of paraphrasing, he was a guy who always felt that, you could just insert him in, right? He's a team player first. You can just insert him in and he gets heat up and score. But he's kind of seeing this here that it's not quite as easy to be that sixth man role coming from a guy who outside of his freshman year at Delaware has been a starter all the way through. He said it's been an adjustment for him. So Chip, the last 2 games, IT Horton has played 28 minutes, attempted 2 shots, 0 points. The 0 points is one thing, but for a guy who's been a shooter his entire career, has made over 120 something threes in his career, only get up 2 shots. That means his role, his comfort level on the court is not there. And if he's not giving you anything, or I don't say anything, but he's not giving you, outstanding defense, you got to find a way to get this fixed, Chip. I don't know if it's, possibly Chris Johnson coming on, seeing more time, or if it's even an idea that I floated out prior to last night's game, maybe sliding IT into the starting lineup to where he at least gets his rhythm. You get the points out of him, but that to me, in my mind, is necessitated upon Tyrese Hunter playing improved defense and your other forwards being above average defensively. Because Max Asmus is what he is defensively, right? We saw Pop Isaacs take him down, a crucial stretch there when Texas had cut the Texas Tech lead to 6. All of a sudden they turn to Pop Isaacs, say, go take your smaller man after Dylan Mitchell kind of fronted him a little bit. Pop Isaacs gets a score. So Max Asmus is what he is defensively, and IT Horton is what he is defensively. So in my mind, Chip, Dessou, certainly a big factor. You think you got to start him. But if you're not getting anything out of IT, a guy's a 50-year player, someone's averaged over 10 points for his career, it's tough. I think it's going to be really tough for this team.
Well, I'm going to blow your mind here.
Okay.
And I've been saying I think Kendall Weaver is a little bit of a Royale Ivy starter kit from a defensive standpoint. And I'm almost inclined to give him more minutes because the top of the defense, meaning the guards, the top of your defensive presence is not good.
Right.
And Kendall Weaver can give you that. And even if teams are attacking Asmus, Weaver's a guy who's quick enough to get over and help double or at least discourage teams from just, getting into one-on-one situations with Max Asmus. Because what Kendall Weaver gives you is defensive effort and he gives you more possessions. So as long as he's playing with that kind of intensity, and I think that kind of intensity needs to be rewarded because Dylan Mitchell is amazing, but there are still times defensively where he's like, where's my man? And you're like, how can that be? Like, what are you thinking about? You're so talented. You have all this ability. The guy can, go get rebounds whenever he wants. He can clean up around the rim. He's certainly got to work on his range. But Dylan Mitchell should be an automatic double-double every game with his rebounding and just putbacks. He should be able to get 10 points. If more guys think that way, think defensively, rebounding, we talked about Onyema. If he's dialed into rebounding and blocking shots and not even thinking about his offense, he's going to get more minutes because everybody gets energy and gets more confidence, honestly, when they're making good defensive plays and it's leading to offense. And that's the system that Rodney Terry grew up in under Rick Barnes. Rick Barnes always said, don't worry about shooting. Don't worry about shooting. Shooting's going to come and go. Give me everything you got on defense, and the shooting will take care of itself. He always told players to get lost in the game. And it has served Rick Barnes well. Now, 1 Final Four. But that's where Rodney Terry's got to lay down the law with this team because it was looking messy. It was not progressing. It was getting worse. And that sort of came to a head in the loss to Texas Tech at home in that Big 12 opener. And I thought what we saw last night from an intensity, effort, standpoint, led by Dylan Dizu. We know what Max Asmus is, but they need energy and they need better defense up front. I thought Tyrese Hunter could be that guy. He's up and down. He was cramping again the other night, or maybe it was the flu still bothering him. But the one thing I've seen from Kendall Weaver is nonstop effort, and that needs to be rewarded because he needs to maintain that every time he comes into the game to help set that tone on the front end of the defense. If you got Dylan Dizu, hopefully Caden Shedrick can get healthy and get right, and Dylan Mitchell all working that hard on the defensive end, I think this team will get better. And so I'm fascinated to see how Rodney Terry handles this.
Yeah, Chip. I mean, to your point with Kendall, and it is a very good point. Perimeter defense is one, again, especially with Max. You know what you're going to get on the offensive end, and the same applies for the defensive end. You know, he's 6 foot, and to be honest, that's probably in shoes, right? Maybe 6 and change in sneakers, right? So he's going to be a guy like Max tries defensively. You know, it's not a lack of effort, but he just is what he is. Tyrese Hunter even had a moment last night, Chip. I'm not even going to try and pronounce the forward from Cincy's name. It's Simus, but I'm not even going to pronounce the last name. Chip, I'm sure you saw when Cincy went up 1. Excuse me. Yeah, I think Right. I believe it was the shot that put Cincy up 1. He just took Tyrese Hunter, at 6'6", just backed him down, got him right there around the free throw line, made his move, fade away, a bucket, right? And that's one of those times. I mean, I guess maybe if you would have liked to see Dylan Mitchell possibly switch, but since he also had the big man, the 7-footer, the other kid whose name I'm not going to pronounce. For the audience, they had a couple of overseas kids whose names
Aziz Bondego.
There we go. Yeah, who was having a good night as well. So that probably necessitated for Dylan's size in the post, right? But yeah, they need better perimeter defense. I mean, even since he shot the 3-ball well last night, and that's something that kind of troubles you, especially coming off of Texas Tech really shooting the 3-ball well. And again, to bring it back to where we started this conversation, Dizu saved the day. Is 4 of 10 from 3, just instant scoring. And Chip, the thing with Dizu that you really, in my mind, was the first time we saw this year against premier competition. Tyrese Hunter, I got to give him credit. His outside game has improved as well as his 2-point shot. Shot like 38% last year. He's out 45, 46% this year. A 3-ball, still not a consistent part of his game, but it's getting better. But there hasn't been a time, even Max doesn't have issues getting to his spots. For all of his size limitations, he gets to his spots. But Dylan Disu was a guy who was like, give me the ball, I'm going to dribble, penetrate, and was able to make plays. And that helped as well. So really helped open up things for his game. So we'll have to see how that goes. But yeah, definitely a pivotal stretch.
And I know we're spending more time on basketball than we've ever spent, but that's the fascinating thing for me about when Shedrick comes back, because Dizu was dragging defenders all over the floor out to the 3-point line. He's got that little push shot, that mid-range. And then he's got, moves around the basket too. Over the shoulder moves, little bank shots. He's a complete player. And this is why he came back. He wants the load. He wants to be the guy. And I thought that was really big. And when Shedrick comes back, they have to, figure out ways to make Dylan Dizu a matchup nightmare, because we know they're going to be, if he's playing center, there's a good chance he's going to have that matchup advantage, dragging 7-footers out who aren't, great perimeter defenders. And Shedrick hasn't shown us that yet. So he can, I think, but Dizu showed us in exclamation points last night that he can do it. So they got to keep this offense moving. And I know I sound crazy for saying get Kendall Weaver more minutes, but I think he can help defensively. I think he can come over and help. I think he can help. He can be that guy who just runs around like a Dennis Rodman and just causes trouble, kind of what Brock does, from the forward position. And we'll see, because I think the energy of this team needs to go up. I got too many guys who let their offense affect their defense. Seems like Tyrese Hunter lets that happen. It seems like, IT Horton lets that happen. And I need a guy who's just focused on causing havoc and getting the ball to Dylan DeZoo, getting the ball to Max A. Smith and Dylan Mitchell if he's, if he can get 6 or 8 feet of range. And then let's see what that looks like, because I know it sounds scary not to have shooters on the floor, but it's amazing how balls end up in the basket when you're playing great defense. Kind of the calling card of Chris Beard as well. All right.
Hey, Chip, really quick, just before you go to take or leave it, just want to get this last thought in. They have to win these two. They have to win against West Virginia and UCF, because you got 4: Houston, Oklahoma, Baylor, and what's that fourth one? BYU, all top 25 teams. So they need to win these two. Just want to sneak that in.
Yeah, and that's why I said what I said in my column this morning, that Dylan DeZoo may have saved the season, because if their confidence continued to drop, and if they went through a losing spell of 3-4 games in a row, I don't know that you get this team back. Yeah,
exactly.
So Rodney's got to take this momentum and turn it into something really positive. All right, let's move on to take it or leave it, kids. We'll do that when we come back right after this. And if you're watching us on the Horns247 YouTube channel, please like and subscribe the channel. And of course, if you listen to us on podcast or wherever you listen to us, please, we'd love a 5-star rating. Positive review helps with the bosses. But Eric, it is time for some take it or leave it. You ready?
I am ready, Chip, and I think you are tossing it to me first.
Okay. All right.
Get it up. There we go.
All right. The biggest decision to return by a Texas football player so far is Alfred Collins. Take it or leave it.
So, Chip, really quick, I should have asked you when you pitched this question. You're just referring to the guys who have decided to return. That's not a hypothetical as far as could an A.D. Mitchell or Jonathan Brooks have returned, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's of the players who have decided to return so far.
So far. There we go. All right. So,
Yo,
far,
Quinn. About a little something, yeah.
No, so far, yes. So far, far and away, in my mind, it is AC. No disrespect to Benda, no respect to Jake Majors, 2 very crucial, pivotal, I'll even call them culture pieces, but AC, Chip, and you can speak this better than I have, having, seen the entirety of his Texas career, feels like a guy who's still scratching the surface, Chip, and it's not often in my experience. Usually around junior year, midway through junior year, it's like, all right, we've seen it. It's time to give that young guy a look. AC still, as a 4th year and entering a 5th year guy, still looks like he can just scratch that surface, that potential, and have a breakout year. So I'm saying I'm taking it. What about you?
Yeah, I agree. I'm taking this. Alfred Collins, 3rd highest rated pass rusher on the team, behind Byron Murphy and Baron Sorrell. Behind Tavondre Sweat and Byron Murphy. So Alfred Collins, keep coming. Keep it coming. You got a chance to make yourself a whole lot of money in 2024.
Next one up. The hardest player to replace of the early departures is AD, the touchdown guy, Adonai Mitchell.
Okay, so this is interesting. If Alfred Collins had not chosen to return, I'd probably say Byron Murphy here. But because Alfred Collins is returning, along with Vernon Broughton, that eases the pain of losing Byron Murphy a little bit. So I'm going to take this. Adonai Mitchell, I've joked, he was a gift from the football gods. It's like that scene in Animal House where the kid's looking at the Playboy on his bed, and then the girl comes flying in through the window dressed as a Playboy bunny, and he's like, "Thank you, God." Adonai Mitchell, unbelievable. I mean, more end zone targets than any other player. Every time they needed a big play, they went to him. He almost pulled off the unthinkable in the Sugar Bowl. So, yeah, I'm going to take this, Eric. How about you?
Chip, I'm actually going to take it as well. I was a little bit torn. My gut kind of leaned Byron Murphy, but this is why I'm going to go with AD. We saw, and again, you can speak this better than I did, I can, being here, last year, but you saw how hard it was to get Xavier Worthy receptions in 2022. Steve Sarkisian openly talked about it. To get X 6-7 catches would have taken 15, 16 targets. This year, you can get him 7-8 catches on 10 targets, right? To my mind, Chip, while some of that has to do with the stability at quarterback, not having to go between Hudson Card and Quentin Ewers, I think a lot of that is having a legit number 1A / number 2 option on the other side. Where does that kind of see itself in 2024, right? Again, we're talking about young guys, Jonte Cook, DeAndre Moore, Ryan Wingo, Matt Golden, still would be a junior. He'll probably be the most veteran of the bunch. Having that established guy on the outside, we saw what that did for the entire offense. And even, Chip, when Malik Murphy came in, and, it was a little bit tougher for him to get X the ball, but he had that safety blanket and AD. So, yeah, I'm going to take it, Chip.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Our final, take it or leave it. Dylan DeZeu's 33-point night in the 74-73 win over Cincinnati saved Texas men's basketball season. Take it or leave it.
I was torn on this. Initially, I was going to leave it, Chip, but you know what? I'm taking it. And it's because of that last point I mentioned. You get West Virginia. They're struggling this year. We all know the turmoil they had. Old Huggy Bear got himself in a bit of trouble, so he's no longer with the program. They're kind of in a rebuild mode. And Mama Mater UCF, they're obviously a first-year Big 12 team under Johnny Dawkins. You got to get these two, right? Because had things gone left and they lost that game against Cincy, another Big 12 newcomer, which, by the way, if you didn't watch that game, that was no walk in the park. That was a raucous. I wrote about it, Chip. Cincy is such a storied program. They spent the majority of their history being a mid-major. From Tampa, I remember them being in the old Metro Conference and like the great Midwest Conference or whatever that was that USF played in, in the early 90s, right? So this is their first game. And then they played in the shell of the Big East. It wasn't the real Big East, right? So this was their first game being part of a power conference. And those fans were jacked all night. To get the win in that environment, I think was huge because, like I said, you get 4 ranked teams after this 2-game stretch. If you can win these 3, at least develop some confidence, maybe DeSue keeps it going. You get Shedrick back. Maybe you can get an IT going, or as you talk about, maybe Kendall Weaver more minutes. Maybe Onyema kind of feels this, it gets his stride back a little bit. That will serve huge into the meat of this Big 12 schedule.
Yeah, I'm going to take it as well because it just feels like this team has been looking for someone to lead who can, be a focal point. That helps take some of the pressure off too, the other guys. If they know that the offense is going to go through Dylan DeZue or he needs more touches, and I think that's on Rodney Terry to coach it and encourage it that way. That can take pressure off other guys. How connected is this team? That's another big question I've had. They don't look like they're very connected. They need to go to Steve Sarkisian's culture classes to develop culture Thursdays or something. They start something on their own, but they got to be more connected because if Dylan DeZue is going to put this on his shoulders, other guys have to step up. And it feels like up to this point, they've been kind of looking around for someone else to lead and not try to figure this out collectively. So yeah, I'm going to take this because this is the Dylan DeZue we saw in the Big 12 tournament last year, in the NCAA tournament. I mean, there was no greater example than that Penn State game. Texas up by 11, they're cruising, and then all of a sudden Penn State can't miss. And they're up 3 with 4:48 left. That's winning time. Anytime you get to the final 4 minutes, that's crunch time. And Marcus Carr says, no, don't drop the play for me. Draw it up for Dylan. He's hot. and the guy goes out and scores 10 of the next 12 points to stretch that lead back out to almost 10 points. This guy can do it. We've seen it. We saw it again last night. I'm going to take this, and I don't know. It's going to be fascinating. These next, as you said, Eric, these next few games are going to be a critical stretch for whether this team finds an identity and some confidence and some backbone and some grit to, win tightly contested games in a league where it's nothing but ranked opponents. So, yeah, I'm going to take it as well. All right, everybody. We're glad to be back, and we're thankful for you all listening in to this episode of the Flagship Podcast. Again, please like and subscribe to this Horns247 YouTube channel. And if you listen to us on podcast, please feel free to give us a 5-star rating, say something nice. We appreciate it. And until next time, we'll see you over at horns247.com. For Eric Henry, I'm Chip Brown. Stay safe and keep the faith.